Welcome, friend, to Life and Liberty Radio. I'm David Householder, here to encourage your pursuit of happiness. You and our partners exploring our shared spiritual journeys. Together, we're dreaming and working for a free society. Tell others today about our adventure in faith and freedom. So breathe in, open your mind, lift up your spirit. Let's get started. Today we're going to talk about the paradox of faith. God's yes and God's no. The truth is, if we're honest with ourselves and our relationship with our Creator, there's a lot of ambiguity there. And I do believe that growing in our faith, growing in our spirituality, demands that we recognize that ambiguity and not settle for little formulas, little Sunday school answers, little simplistic ways of describing how things are. I do believe that many, many big questions, the answer is not yes or no. The answer is yes and no. And the one spiritual thinker that I tend to resonate with happens to be the one in whose tradition I was raised, and that is Martin Luther from the early 1500s in Germany. Martin Luther went to a monastery to try to find his way to salvation, to straighten out his soul. If you can picture just sort of his soul being a wrinkled shirt, he wanted to get it ironed out. But he found out that he was really just burning the shirt with the iron. He said, if anyone could be saved by monkery, by being a monk, it was me. And he was able to break through that because the monastery, as many monasteries, was full of patterns. You follow patterns. There's nothing wrong with patterns, but you pray at certain times and you follow certain orders. They even call it an order that you join. Ordination means to become an ordered spiritual thinker. Ordination, order. And so he was ordained, and he became a priest, and he became part of an order, the Augustinian order. And he found that there was no real spiritual growth, true spiritual growth, honest spiritual growth in the order. And his answer became yes and no to so many things. When he was asked, are we truly saved and justified by what Jesus did on the cross, his answer was an emphatic yes, and yet no, we still continue with our brokenness in this world. He said in Latin, simul justus et peccator, we are at the same time totally justified, totally righteous before God because of what Jesus did, and yet we're still totally broken, peccator, sinners. And we live with that tension, that yes and that no. And the older I get, the more comfortable I am with paradox and tension. Now, I like Martin Luther, but God save us from his footnoters, the people that came after him, the generation of systematizers who turned Luther's paradoxes into another system called Lutheranism, in which I was raised. I kind of like Calvin. I like Luther. I like John Piper. I like Mike Driscoll. I like Chuck Smith. I like reading their stuff. There's energy there. There's vitality there. But they're footnoters. Good Lord. It's really hard to even talk to them because they don't understand the insights that these men had. So let's look at a couple of common questions about our spiritual life. Does God punish us? Is our life planned? Am I truly born again? Is this the end times? And is God in control? Let's look at those briefly, one at a time. So often something bad happens to one of my church members, and someone will come to me and say, do you think God is punishing me? And of course, my instant compassionate answer is, of course not. Why would God punish us? But the truth is, the Bible is full of all kinds of ambiguity about punishment or how the Creator's energy and power results in negativity for us, and perhaps intentional, perhaps unintentional, perhaps it's just the system, perhaps we got caught up in the way things simply are, and we broke ourselves on the boundaries. And very often we don't get punished, but we punish ourselves by our behavior. But the truth is, the Bible is also full of instances where God is punishing his people, especially Israel. And here we have this incredible tension. As a sophisticated, compassionate person, I want to say, of course not. God would never punish. John 10, verse 10 says, "The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I come to bring life that you might have it abundantly. Therefore, if it's bad, it's not from God. If it's good, it is from God." And I resonate with that. That's my home base spiritually. But the truth is, there is a lot of tension there. And much like with parenting and any relationship, there's tension. If you have a relationship with God, there will be tension. God is not going to say yes to everything we do. And the way God says no sometimes is very uncomfortable. Do we call that punishment? Or just discipline? It depends on the word you use. So does God punish us? I would say yes and no. Second question, is my life planned out? Is there a plan for my life? Is there a destiny? Or do I have to just make that? Well, I would have to think, yes, there are people for whom focus on one's destiny or purpose is incredibly useful and beneficial, adds so much value to their lives. I look at people who believe their life is a destiny and people who don't. And it's fascinating how it has very little to do whether or not they are Christians or religious in any sense. Some people have a sense of destiny. Some people don't. And the people that do, in general, do much, much better in life because they have a sense of purpose other than just making it up as they go and calling it purpose. But the truth is, it's really hard to sense the Creator's plan for our lives. And it never comes to us as an itinerary. And we have to sort of wrestle it out, struggle it out with fear and trembling, and ask ourselves, am I on the right track? But if you remember like a model train, and if the wheels aren't all lined up, it's not very smooth. You got to get all the wheels all lined up all the way down the train's length. And you just know it if you're not on the right track or if something's dragging. There's no smoothness to our lives. And when we're in that zone, in that water slide, it just feels great. But do we know where that's going? Not all the time. We see through a glass darkly. And there are times where freedom is so real in our lives. No matter what scientists tell us, no matter what theologians tell us, we sense and experience total freedom of choice from time to time. And there is a real sense that God does not know what we're going to choose. And you see that in the Bible, too, where God is waiting to hear what people will do or changing his mind. And there's a tension there. I don't think there's just one future all mapped out. I think there's multiple futures and multiple levels. And it all depends on what we do. And the Creator God has all this bandwidth. And it thinks in multiple possibilities rather than just one. And the idea that if there's just one possible future and God just knows what it is, we have free will, but not really. Because if there's just one possible future, there's no real choice. And all of us feel that choice, but all of us also sense that sovereignty, that rule of God does not belong to us. It belongs somewhere else. And there's also the very real sense, along with freedom, that we're reading a script that we didn't write. That some things were just meant to be, whether or not we like it, whether or not we said yes to it. And so is life planned? Do we have a destiny? Yes and no. Third question, how can I be born again? Am I born again? People in Christian communities, in any spiritual community, often have breakthrough spiritual experiences, much like a rebirth. Jesus said we must be born from above, literally, born from heaven, that which is flesh is flesh. We're born of flesh, and then we're also born spiritually, and spiritual birth comes later. So when someone has this conversion experience, is he or she born again? Well, the truth is we go back to a state of normal thinking at some point. Now, that normal thinking is never the same after one of these spiritual breakthroughs, but we reach another flat level, and we ask ourselves, did that really happen? Did I really have the breakthrough? If I had the breakthrough, why do I feel so normal now? And kind of similar emotionally to how I was wired up before. Was that just a blip in the radar screen and now I'm back to the way I was? Or am I different than the way I was? Because I can't really remember. Well, the truth is transformation, being born again, renewed, is kind of ambiguous. We go through it, and we are where we are afterwards. And the key there is to continue to be refreshed daily and to continue to look for new ways of being. And when we have insights, to resist the temptation to return to the way we were beforehand. And it often happens. I see people make big breakthroughs in their lives, and a year and a half later, they're right back where they were. And very often, we don't see the big breakthroughs we need to make. So Christians will ask each other, are you born again? And often, trivially, they just mean, have you prayed a prayer to receive Jesus? Well, okay, people can walk through a prayer like that and mean it at some level, although I don't think any human being means anything at every level, because we're ambiguous in our thinking and never totally single-minded in this world, at least. And people have these prayer experiences where they've said yes to the Christian faith, and I ask myself, okay, is that person born again? And the truth is, it's a matter of working it out as we go, a matter of praying as we go. So if we look at the phrase, are you born again because you've had a big breakthrough, the answer is, yeah, you're never going to go back to the way you were. But yes and no, there's things we do go back to. Would you like to see people's faith come alive in your church? Wouldn't it be good to see new people make friends and see people learn as they grow in the content of our faith? If so, check out the Blackberry Bush course for your congregation, blackberrybush.org. Bring your church on a spiritual treasure hunt. So does God punish us? Yes and no. Is life planned? Yes and no. Are we born again? Yes and no. Another thing that comes up a lot for me is, are we in the end times? And this was especially big at Y2K and the Mayan Apocalypse 2012. These things continue over and over and over. People come together and say, this is it. This is the end. We're finished. And they look around and say, look at society. This is proof that we are in the end times. Well, the truth is, our sense of time and timeline is very conditioned by our language, which is based on Latin and Greek and Germanic here in English, the English-speaking world, and it's very linear as opposed to the Hebrew and Arabic and other languages of the Middle East, where it was less so. So the idea that time goes off to a certain place and so does God punish us? Yes and no. Is life planned? Yes and no. Are we born again? Yes and no. Another thing that comes up a lot for me is, are we in the end times? And this was especially big at Y2K and the Mayan Apocalypse 2012. These things continue over and over and over. People come together and say, this is it. This is the end. We're finished. And they look around and they say, look at society. This is proof that we are in the end times. Well, the truth is, our sense of time and timeline is very conditioned by our language, which is based on Latin and Greek and Germanic here in English, the English-speaking world, and it's very linear as opposed to the Hebrew and Arabic and other languages of the Middle East, where it was less so. So the idea that time goes off to a certain place and ends or comes to a point is very Western, very Greek, and kind of foreign to the Bible people in general. But still, I do believe that there is